Good evening and thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Farzana Afridi, the moderator for this discussion today, along with Bhavya Gupta, who's a PhD scholar at Jawaharlal Nehru University. The discussion today is organized by the Digital Platform and Women's Economic Empowerment Program, which is funded by the Bill and the Melinda Gates Foundation to understand and enhance women's engagement with the digital economy in India. Under this program, we are undertaking multiple field interventions related to information and skills in this emerging sector, including the legal status and rights of platform workers. We are very privileged to have with us an extremely distinguished and diverse set of panelists to deliberate on the issues facing platform workers in India today. And I'll just introduce you very briefly to them. We have Apoorv Kulkarni, who is the head of research and head of Center for Inclusive Mobility at the Ola Mobility Institute Foundation, with a very specific focus also that they have on making urban mobility ecosystem universally accessible. Dr. Bornali Bhandari is a professor at the National Council for Applied Economic Research, and her focus is on the impact of globalization on development. Very relevant for us is the fact that she has recently authored an important report on the delivery platforms in India. Nikhil Dey, many of us know very well, is the founding member of the Mazdoor Kishan Shakti Sangthan, MKSS, and the Suchna Rozgar Abhiyan for advancing rights-based legislations, including gig workers' social security law very recently. Dr. Sona Mitra is principal economist with the Initiative for What Works to Advance Women and Girls in the Economy, or IWWAGE, and it is at the forefront of work which is emerging on empowering and improving women and girls' livelihood opportunities in India. And last but not the least, we are extremely happy to have with us Dr. Uma Rani, who's a senior economist at the Research Department of the International Labour Office. And she is an authority on the platform sector and has co-authored the Flagship Report of the ILO on digital labor platforms. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for giving us your valuable time to discuss this very important emerging issue in India's labor market. So just to put this issue in perspective, and we are, as I said, we have one of the authors of this one very authoritative report on digital labor platforms, the ILO's 2021 Flagship Report, which highlighted the fact that there has been a tenfold increase in the number of digital labor platforms over the last decade in the world. And India is amongst the fastest growing countries, accounting for 8% of the world's labor market platforms. And according to a recent or last year's report by NITI Aayog, their estimate is that there are about 7 million platform workers in India, which is expected to grow to about 20 million in a decade or so. So that's a large chunk of our workforce. And so it's very important to discuss not just the fact that the platform sector provides an opportunity to improve employment opportunities in India, but it also raises several new challenges related to the workforce on these platforms. In particular, the fact that the nature of the work is still categorized as informal, whether they have security in terms of minimum wages and earnings, other social security benefits, guarantees, and issues related to workplace conditions. Particularly, of course, we are still figuring out how to define the workplace of these platform workers. So Uma, I just wanted to start with you first, given the very broad perspective that you have on this sector. We understand the digital platform workforce is very diverse and includes various types of work, from ride sharing to freelance tasks. So what, according to you, are some of the unifying issues faced by platform workers across these different contexts? And how do you think platform companies can address them? And we'll come to talking about the policies in government later.
Thanks a lot, Farzana, for having me for this discussion. And before I jump into answering your question, there are 2 points that I thought are very important to lay down so that, we end up looking at the whole issue of platforms in a sense of saying, yes, employment generation. So, a whole lot of jobs will get destroyed. So I think that narrative needs to be put on the side. Because like you very rightly said, whether you talk about taxi drivers, domestic workers, freelance workers, software coders, or programmers, all of this exists in the traditional labor market, continues to exist in the traditional labor market today. It's just that platforms are coming in and trying to mediate these services between the consumers, clients, and the workers. I think this narrative needs to be set right. A differentiated factor you very rightly mentioned, and I think this is also something we need to keep in mind when we go into a discussion about platforms, is this is not just a low end, taxi driving, domestic workers, nurses, and all who are getting affected today, but it's also the high end. You're talking about legal specialists, patent specialists, software coders, programmers, finance analysts, data analysts who are getting affected. So there is a tendency for platformization of work that is happening. The unifying factor, irrespective of the sector you choose and irrespective of where it is based, I think the business model has certain very clear characteristics that defines the way it operates. First thing is you need to have a terms of service agreement, which needs to be signed up by a worker before they can even access work, which is unilaterally determined by the platform itself. This is across the globe, across all sectors. And that defines, in a sense, a lot of things with regard to how a worker needs to behave on these platforms. A second thing that is similar is the use of algorithmic management practices, from allocating of tasks to ensuring that the work is done to monitoring and rewarding. Now, what's very different within these algorithmic management practices is where in certain cases you have human element that's built in, like in the case of freelance workers, where you have an algorithm that does the matching, but then you have somebody from the platform company who will come and help the client choose from the final file that is taken. So there are human elements, but that's up to the interest of the platform that it decides. Now, one of the things as a result of it that happens is that the entire mechanism, if there is a dispute or anything, there's no dispute resolution mechanism. In most of these platforms, there are some that they have it, but in most of them, you don't really have any of these mechanisms, and a worker can be deactivated easily without any rhyme or reason. Often, there's no way you can have an appeal. I think another unifying factor that you see, again, it varies depending upon the platform and depends upon the sector, is the charging of commission fees. So most platforms actually charge a commission fee to the worker. The only thing, it varies. Now, what's very interesting within the context of India, I have to say, is that there has been some experimentation that is happening where you have the Uberization of the platform model that's coming in. But at the same time, there are other alternative models that are coming in, like the marketplace or others, where there are slight changes to the business strategy, slight changes to the extent to which network effects are done, and that slightly improvises certain conditions, but overall, the business ethics remains the same. And I think last but least, which is very important from the ILO's point of view, is the classification of the worker as a self-employed or an independent contractor, because that in some sense sets a bar with regard to whether the worker is going to get any of the benefits, both labor protection and social protection. And the final thing that I'd like to raise, because this might be something important for others to pick up, is how all of these platforms, though they enter these different sectors, domestic services in the domestic work sector, taxis in the taxi sector, delivery in delivery, they all do not get themselves registered in those sectors. They register themselves as a tech company. I think that's fundamentally problematic as we look into it. Let me stop here for the moment. Thank you.
That's the great points to pick up on. I think Nikhil will be able to talk a little bit more from the Indian perspective, drawing on your recent remarkable achievement in relation to the enactment of the Rajasthan platform gig-based, the Platform-Based Gig Workers Act of 2023, which has been hailed across India as a path breaker. So how effectively, Nikhil, do you think this legislation addresses the concerns, particularly related to formalization, minimum wages, social security provision, some of these issues which Uma just mentioned, in the Indian context?
So I think Uma has laid out a whole range of things that affect not just the way business is done, because that's obviously where this has all come from, but affects the way work is done. And therefore, just as she's tried to pick up on what are the unifying factors for business, for commerce, what are the unifying factors for the workers who are driving that commerce? And I think one of the very important things to understand that it is very work-based. Each one of those platforms are not something that is mechanization. Yeah, there is a tech aspect to it, and the tech aspect is the platform. And in that, there are 2-3 things. I mean, the 3 questions you've said, I'll try and address, and I'll try and be as quick as possible and brief as possible, because Uma's issues are many, and I think they need a lot of thought, and maybe today we'll just sort of touch upon them. But I think what one needs to understand, first I'll deal with some of the questions that you are talking about, and then I'll talk about some of the others that Uma has raised. So the 3 questions, social security, let's start with, because at least there is a consensus, at least a spoken consensus, particularly in a country like India, when it comes to workers, that if you do not meet social security concerns, that's unacceptable. Even the platforms say that in all discussions. Some of them say, oh, but we are doing insurance, we're doing something else. But the fact of the matter is, if you go amongst the workers, you'll see, particularly again in countries like India, because there's such large numbers at the low end, what Uma talked about, that they are actually working very long hours, not being able to make ends meet. And when they come onto the platform, there's one story, but little later, the story changes a lot. Now, how does the story change? It's because they are controlled. And Uma, a little bit there, I have a question, that they are controlled by algorithms, which is a human element. There is nothing algorithmic about an algorithm, except the fact that it does what the human being wants. And then, yes, you have a mix of the algorithm and the human being as well. And which is why you have what you call deactivating workers, what the workers call ID block ho gaya. So where there is any kind of conflict, the numbers of people, conflict or disputes, the numbers of people whose IDs get blocked, which is basically firing someone. So the second part, there is a consensus on social security. I think the Rajasthan law provided a fabulous breakthrough in being able to say, how do you secure basic social security rights? What exactly they will be will come a little bit, I'll talk about a bit later. But otherwise, each platform will do its own bit while paying lip service to social security. But here's a law that can lay down basic minimum social security. Second part is regulation, which this law does not actually do that much of, and which is a crying need, which is why you have long working hours, you have all kinds of unfair relationships. And the unfair relationships come from, and there's a very interesting sort of, it's a metaphor, not a metaphor, but it's an example that comes when the discussions were going on about the Rajasthan law with all stakeholders, everyone in the room, and the platform people said, but you know, this is all data that will, if we give it to the government, privacy issues will be affected. Two things were said by some of the platform workers who had been trying to organize for a long time. Number one, they said, for the first time, we are meeting a human being on the other side in years, in almost a decade or longer of trying to negotiate. We only are talking to apps. We are only given methods of registering our complaint on an app and we get an answer from there. We don't talk to people, which you normally do in any relationship, whether it's work or contract. The second thing they said is my data is kept private from me. It's my data and I don't get access to it. It's my work, it's my hours, it's my petrol, it's my time. And through this, for the first time, because there will be a central transaction and monitoring system where the data will flow through the Social Security Board and the individuals can see it, the aggregated data can be seen in different ways. So privacy is not affected. It will give a very big opportunity for workers to be able to see what is their relationship, working relationship based on. So even though you can't regulate, at least you can see through this law, because this law restricts itself to Social Security benefits, but it gives an opportunity because of the law for workers to be able to see their own data. And the third point that I'll bring up, which Uma talked about, is that because there is one Social Security legal board, you have an opportunity for some kind of dispute resolution, grievance redress, whatever you may call it, because a board, like in other boards, has the capacity to be able to, it has representation from all sides, it's a tripartite board, but it has an opportunity to build a legal framework where the particular complaints of workers, they can go through, where there is an independent body that is going to look at it. For now, I'll just leave it at that. There are lots of details that one goes into, but the last thing I'd like to say a little bit is the formalization question. I think this is the greatest informalization of the workplace that has happened in recent times. And this is clutching at some kind of attempt, and it is a ray of hope, that at least if you can bring everyone onto one place and turn the platform has been a great advantage to the employers or to the people who sign the, whatever you call them, the aggregators, they don't like to be called employers, to the aggregators. It changes it to the extent that it says that we are all workers of one kind. And all these unifying factors that Uma talks about, if you say that all of them can be unified in certain Social Security labor rights, then there is a way of bringing them towards being able to deal with their issues from their point of view. And the platform itself offers an opportunity for you to say, okay, I may not be an employee of you for a year. I may be, according to your definition, on a micro contract, but even that micro contract must have an element of Social Security. So with if I'm employed just from being taken from my house to the airport or to the railway station, within that is my Social Security right. So the fact that I'm on a digital platform gives me an opportunity to say, built into that must be my Social Security rights into every bit of my transaction. And that in our understanding is a breakthrough, which we have to see how well it is.
That's, I think what you touched upon, Nikhil, here, talking about both the informalization as well as the data issue. We'll come to that again later, where I absolutely agree with you. The issues related to data availability, at least in an aggregate sense, if it is available, it gives us a much better idea of what is happening in the sector. And I think, we have now here with us also Apoorv, who will be able to give us a perspective from the side of the platforms coming from the research think tank of the Ola Mobility Institute, which has an understanding both of the worker perspective as well as the aggregator sides in the platform economy. So Apoorv, I wanted to ask you, what do you think are the key considerations to deliver worker welfare and all of these issues that both Nikhil and Uma have touched upon, but at the same time balance the sustainability of the platform economy at large? Because the moment we start talking about regulation, there would be some concerns about, is this going to affect the growth of the sector? And there have been some issues which we'll talk about later, for example, in Europe, where regulation has led to some of these platforms exiting the market itself. So just from your perspective, where do you think, where does the balance lie?
Thank you, Farzana ji, for the question and for having me. I'd like to start by making a small correction in that I am from OMI Foundation. We are an independent, non-partisan think tank. We do policy research and social innovation work. So I think there's a small update in the name of the organization, perhaps, which is required. To respond to your questions, OMI Foundation has been conducting some of the earliest and most comprehensive research in the platform economy space, which gives us a robust understanding of both the aggregator and the worker side. We've learned through our research that aggregators or platform businesses, for instance, maximize use of idle asset and unlock many, many livelihood opportunities. For the workers themselves, platform work is attractive and valuable because it gives them the flexibility, the entrepreneurial nature of work, as well as higher earning opportunities than their counterparts in the informal space. For instance, our research has shown that platform drivers earn 25% more per hour of work as compared to their informal counterparts. And this is very important because many of these people are primary bread earners and support large number of people. These platforms also facilitate livelihood for women, as well as help in increasing digital proficiency. So there are other benefits that come out of this. The platform businesses themselves are subjected to the same demand and supply market forces, as well as regulations from the government, much like the other spaces. And as a result of which, the platform worker on one end enjoys the higher remuneration that is earned because of the increasing demand on one hand, but also on the other hand is protected from if there's a floor. For example, in the ride-sharing industry, the RTO specifies a fare chart which needs to be accepted while pricing and payments, which these companies have to abide by. So there is this equation of demand and supply as well as market regulation that the platform businesses have to work with, and that benefits the platform workers in turn. On the social protection front, even before the Code on Social Security came into being, the workers were given accident benefits and healthcare protection of different ways. Having said that, I think the Code on Social Security itself is a monumental step because it does put in place various social protection measures that should be in place on one hand, and on the other hand, also recognizes platform work as a separate category of work, which will then allow tailored solution for this space. Over here, there are a few considerations that I would like to highlight. Number one is that as we are going ahead, we see central and state regulations come into place. At this point, it's important that these regulations work in harmony with each other so that effective worker protection is delivered on one hand, and on the other, the cost of job creation and the cost of innovation is not rising exponentially. There's another element that I'd like to highlight, which is the platform worker behavior. A platform worker today works with multiple platforms and engages in platform as well as non-platform work within the span of a day, week, month, and year. And therefore, the social protection architecture that is being developed needs to take this reality into consideration. The protection mechanism has to be portable and continuous, whether the worker works with one platform or the other, whether the worker works in one city or state or other. That continuity is extremely important for the worker. The subsequent consideration that I'd like to highlight over here is that there is a reason for us to bring in innovative mechanisms into play rather than relying on traditional mechanisms which were more suited for employment paradigm. Over here, we need to tailor solutions innovatively, which fit and match the workers' earning, saving, and spending patterns. Mechanisms like micro insurance, micro savings, micro pension could find their place over here, which could benefit the worker, because these workers don't earn on a month, they don't get a monthly paycheck. They earn today when they work today. And therefore, there has to be flexibility built into the system so that the solutions work for these workers. And that's very important call out that I'd like to make. I'd like to make two last call outs, which is to begin with, there are many government schemes which are in existence, which are made available to informal workers. They can also be extended to platform workers, but they have a certain ceiling on income, for example, 21,000, or vehicle ownership. And that needs to be revisited so that the full benefit of these schemes and the money that's been collected in their corpus is made available to the workers at large. Lastly, through our research and worker interactions, we have realized that there is a strong desire for the worker to get the money in hand today, as against save and invest in the future for a rainy day. And there is an urgent need to sensitize the workers to make them aware of the benefits and the importance of some of these mechanisms, so that they are also able to fully partake in this evolving infrastructure. The social protection or worker welfare needs to will be effectively delivered when all three parties, which is the government, the industry, which is the aggregators, and the platform workers themselves come together and not only support but also contribute towards this. And I think that is going to unlock the social protection in its true sense, worker welfare in the true sense. I hope I've answered your questions.
Thank you so much, Apoorv. That was very illuminating. Particularly, I was taken in by the point that you made about the portability of any protection that is being offered by the workers, because in this new paradigm, the whole idea is that in the platform sector is that the worker is completely mobile. So it's and that becomes a big issue here. So I think for that, it's very interesting now to go ahead and talk to Bornali, because Bornali has particularly looked at the delivery sector, where mobility issues become really pertinent. And so Bornali, we understand the delivery is one of the fastest growing areas when it comes to the platform sector for providing employment in India. And you recently came out with this report at NCAER. So in terms of the discussion that we've had so far, can you shed some more light specifically on the work environment in the delivery sector and the issues that workers in this sector are facing, since this is expected to expand at a very fast rate in terms of the kinds of work that people are doing, the workers are doing on the platform arena?
Thank you, Farzana, for inviting me here. I have to say a little biased because I heavily referenced Uma's work, the ILO 2001 paper, when I was writing up my report. And actually, I used because I had no other numbers to benchmark with whatever I was coming with. So I used the ILO report as a benchmark to see whether I was getting junk or I was getting any meaningful information. So the one number that matched, I was happy to say, is that independently we got that an average food delivery platform worker was earning about $1.1 an hour. So and that is close to what Uma had found in her 2021 report. It was a very similar report for all of us. About the work conditions of food delivery platform workers, we surveyed workers across all types of cities, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, 924 workers across 28 cities in India. When you first mentioned to me about working conditions, I was thinking that you were more asking us, because we asked them about the number of working hours. We asked them about the average income they were earning. And we also asked them we wanted to ask questions about formality and informality. And we also wanted to ask questions about autonomy, because from the literature, from the international literature, like Uma has written, there's a lot of questions on flexibility and autonomy. So we sort of wanted to understand all this. And very broadly speaking, in answer to your first question, is that an average food delivery platform worker works about 69 hours in a week. My numbers are right. So they are working about 69 hours in a week, and their average monthly earnings is about rupees 20,000. This is gross income. What do I mean by gross income is that that I'm not accounting for the money they are spending on fuel. When you account for that, I'm talking about 2022, the survey was done in 2022. Then when you account for fuel expenses, it comes down to rupees 13,000. So one of the things we need to be very careful about is that as we go ahead, we need to distinguish between gross income and net income. And we need to account for the fuel expenses. One of the criticisms that I received was that you don't account for the expenditure on maintaining your two-wheeler, because most of them are use two-wheelers in food delivery platform. In my particular survey, in this particular survey, 99% were men. So we estimated that the average expenditure on two-wheelers was not very high. But I'm presuming that the average expenditure on other vehicles or four-wheelers would be higher. So we need to take into account for those kind of issues. So that's what the average monthly income was. So once you account for fuel expenses and once you accounted for household expenditure, we didn't get into the detailed questions about household expenditure. As you know, asking them is very tough. We pretty much showed that there was almost negative saving or zero savings in that particular year. They were doing slightly better in 2019, but by 2022, when fuel prices were very high, it affected the workers. It was very challenging for the workers. So that's the numbers per se. Yes, there are part-time workers, there are workers working on 5-hour shifts or special weekends. And then there are workers who are working on 12-hour shifts. And now there's always a difference in the terminology, because their waiting time. We heard that workers were complaining that they had to wait a lot between orders in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So, or if the orders are ready, the restaurants take a lot of time in preparing the orders. So I had asked them questions about that, and that waiting time is there now. And sometimes that waiting time can be perceived as an idle time. But as economists, we know that just because it's lunchtime does not mean that you're not working, so it is included in the working hours. So totally, when you look at those hours, the number of hours is still quite a lot, and you were working 6 days a week. So that's one. I mean, there are nuances within nuances. I just wanted to want to emphasize that as we analyze the food delivery platform work, especially. The second thing is when we looked at informality and formality, we use the informality literature in India and otherwise to assess what is informality. So we said there are 4 criteria for informality. There is whether there is paid work, whether there's a contract, whether there is you have a paid leave, whether you get some social security, employer provided social security. And what we find there is that the platform work is at least giving you some task-based contract, if not tenure-based contract, a written contract. And it is giving majority of the workers were without health insurance. At least here in this particular company, they gave accident insurance, and other companies are now giving other health insurance, and life insurance is also given. And the other thing what we find is there is no paid leave, and of course there are no pensions. So from the formality informality, it moves the needle towards formality, as we assessed it, that yes, there are no paid leave and there are no pensions, but on the other hand, you get accident insurance and you get a written contract. So if there is a movement of the needle to in the informality or formality continuum. The third question we asked them is about the flexibility. Now, the question of flexibility by itself is quite challenging, because in the sense is that flexibility, how do you define flexibility? How do you define autonomy? There are two different things, even in the literature, even in the platform literature that we delved in. And we had to ask ourselves that. And so we asked our degree of questions of how much control they have over the work. This whole question of algorithmic control, how much control do they actually have over the work? So we actually asked them questions like, can you actually control can you increase your earnings if you're polite to your customers? Can you increase your earnings if you're more polite to you work harder or longer hours? So as if they have some control over their work. And what answers we find there on Likert scale, what we find is that yes, workers perceive that they can have some control over their work, but there are external conditions at play like traffic and otherwise, which restrict their earnings. So we use a Pickford framework. I'm sorry if I'm getting the pronunciation wrong. So we use that to actually develop a matrix where we were actually looking at is comparing their work conditions, the work life, and that matrix determines and what continuum you are between the autonomy and non-autonomy space. When we particularly looked at work conditions, we are the kind of the three parameters is whether you are actually able to develop skills in the space, whether you actually have a steady income flow, and what are your time and space arrangements. One of the things on the other side, what we find is that on the work content, we find that platforms, as per the workers, and this is a general result, as per the workers were not particularly perceived that the platforms were not particularly helpful to them or were available to them in the times of need. But the one thing we do find is that workers were actually able to upskill or reskill themselves. That's a consistent result that we find. So from that perspective, it's work conditions are slightly better. Income flow, we have found that the average income is about rupees 20,000. And the time and space arrangements, it's we ask them how flexible are your work hours, how easily can you change your work hours, can you easily tell? So then we find that it's like it's not that easy to change your it's somewhere in the middle that you can change your work hours if you want to change your shifts or you want to change your zone, because within a platform every city is divided into a zone. At least the tier 1 cities are divided into zones, and if they want to change zones, is that easy or not? So those and we find that there are they fall somewhere in the middle. So in the end, I mean, in the summary, if given Uma's this thing, I agree with all her points, because platform, whether we like it or dislike it, the point is that the platform work is creating jobs. We want to be careful about over-regulating it, because given that if we over-regulate it, we run the risk of this place not being able to, we run the risk of not being, it becomes a lesser of an avenue to create jobs. So that's one thing. It does, whether it's our perception, whether you think it moves the needle on formality or not, but it does create, between not having any insurance and between having an accident insurance, there is at least some, I'm not saying all, but there's some partial coverage. We of course need to do more. And it is providing jobs for the educated employment. One of the particularly Indian things that I found was very interesting was that it is, instead of waiting, these are the very educated youth that we are talking about. Most of them had a class 10 degree and above, and about a third were graduates working. Of course, we had surveyed when we were coming out of the pandemic. That time unemployment may have been higher, but the point is your job, providing jobs to educated youth. And we know that ethnographic studies that workers are the youth is, there's a lot, educated unemployment is very high in India. And instead of, there's a famous book by Craig Jeffrey that you're producing and doing nothing. Instead, you at least you have productive employment. That I mean, and that's something we need to think about as we go forward.
Thank you so much, Bornali. I think the point that you made about taking into account what their earnings are, because there are costs that workers also bear on the platform. And so in the interest of time, we'll have to move ahead. And, Sona, I'm waiting to speak with you because you're going to bring in the perspective that is really relevant also for the project that we are looking at over here, which is looking at the women's perspective and women's participation on the platform sector. So it would be great to hear your thoughts on what you think are the unique challenges that were faced by women in accessing the digital platform itself, and also as they work on the platforms relative to men.
Thank you, Farzana, and excellent to hear all the speakers. Yes, of course. I think I'll begin by saying that IWWAGE was actually one of the first to connect with Urban Company, which was Urban Club, in a pre-COVID period to work and understand how platform work impacts women's labor force conditions, working conditions, and how is it actually creating new jobs for women, different kinds of jobs for women. And just to set the record straight, we approached the Urban Company because we wanted to get some stakeholder interviews from them. And then they actually also provided us with list of their employees, and we could actually reach out to the women workers, around 120 women workers and around 40 men. And around that time, that was fairly representative of sample for the company. And what we found, I mean, we did a very rapid survey, and what we actually found were very interesting things, which has been corroborated in subsequent studies. One of the important things, and which is coming out from Bornali's points also, one of the important, and we looked at platforms on service deliveries, not the whole range of work. So, and very specifically into a segment of women beauty salon workers, spa workers, and all of that, because Urban Company caters to that. And what we found was one of the interesting things, that while when we surveyed the women, asking them that why are you shifting from working in a physical parlor into a platform work, one of the most important answers that we got among our options was we had this autonomy on time use, and which was very, very dear to women, because they also have to carry on their care work responsibilities, their responsibilities at home, the household chores and all. And then we actually thought that, okay, flexibility was actually one of the attractive options. And then we moved on to the questions on earnings and incomes from the platforms. And we realized that on an average, a woman would work for 2 to 5 hours a day. And the earnings were around rupees 500 to 1200 per day with those hours. And this was 2019. And if they wanted to increase their earnings, they had to work for at least 7 to 8 hours in a day. And that actually, which means that there was a trade-off between the flexibility component of time use and between earnings. So if the woman wanted to increase her earnings, she would have to forego her flexibility component and work for higher hours. And that's something that struck us, because there was no other way in which she could improve her earnings to a substantial level. Now, this earning that we are reporting is actually not deducted for transport cost and the input cost that the women had to bear, because they had to use some fixed materials for all the services that they were providing. So this was one of the very important findings that we got, and this got corroborated later by many ways. So in addition to all the things that have been said in terms of control by algorithms and not being flexible enough for the men, for women, I think increasing earnings came at a cost of their flexibility and their responsibilities, foregoing their responsibilities or arranging for their responsibilities of care work back home. So that was one of the major unique challenge that women were facing in order to access the platform work. The second thing that we identified was in terms of accessing the platforms. So we are aware about the digital gap, the gender inequality and the digital gap, and access to smartphones by women. And women, young urban women who wanted to really access these platforms had to really make an investment of substantial amount to buy a smartphone to be able to join the platform work. And that was kind of a challenge for that cohort of young women who were coming from almost informal, from the informal labor market or from semi-formal labor markets, but really having to put together a lump sum amount of money to make that investment of acquiring a smartphone to access the platform. And lastly, what we also found was, and as Uma would say, that, this platform work is not outside the labor market. It actually reproduces the physical characteristics of the labor market online. And that was one of the other challenges that women faced, that the kind and the type of works were very limited in the platform. They were restricted to domestic work. They were restricted to beauty and salon services. They were restricted to, all the work that women are usually found doing in the physical space. So having said that, the other thing, and I don't want to take much time because many things have been said and I can come back later. But I think one of the things that we have been struggling was to understand, and later after the study, and of course, looking at Uma's work, phenomenal work, Bornali's report, OMI, several rounds of reports from OMI Foundation, we have been trying to understand where is the data? Where is the data of new jobs being created? Because if we also look at Sabina Diwan's work, she is actually talking about the fact that new jobs are not being created. It is a replication and recreation of the work that is happening that was there already existing at the physical space. It is just merely shifting online. So are we creating new jobs by using technology, by using the platforms? And I think that is a question that we are currently trying to really look at. And we would also probably be helped by what you are working on, Farzana, in your digital platform project, that there's a dearth of data, and we really need to understand whether platforms are really creating new jobs. If they are creating, what are those new jobs, and what would be the requisite amount of skills necessary to access those new types of jobs? Because the older skills are being used to replicate the physical space into the online space. So I'm going to just stop here by highlighting these basic points.
Thank you so much, Sona. I think you made excellent points, and the most important being how women are still relegated to the traditional jobs, even in the platform sector. And very importantly, a lot of these are already existing in the physical space. So what are these new jobs which are being created? And with that, I'll pass it now to Bhavya to ask the second round of questions.
Thank you, Farzana. Taking a cue from the first round of variety of questions, we have already touched on diverse topics and almost all encompassing issues. My first question is to you, Apoorv. You have spoken about the portability of social security mechanisms. Now, how do we see that given this mobility of work, and when I say mobility of work, I'm thinking about more of jobs like ride sharing or delivery services, what measures can be taken to ensure safe and accessible mobility for these platform workers?
Thank you, Bhavya. Before we get into the response, let's try and understand what are different categories of platforms. So you broadly have two categories, which is web-based platforms and location-based platforms. Web-based platforms, an example could be wherein you consult a doctor through telecalling. A location-based platform is wherein you get your medicines delivered to your home or office or wherever you are currently. And for the latter category, the mobility infrastructure plays a huge role, right? Over here, platform companies and aggregators have always been cognizant of the role mobility plays, and therefore they have been providing different benefits from time to time, which can take shape of resting points or amenities such as washrooms through partnerships or even roadside assistance. However, what we need to recognize over here is that these mobility elements are really a matter of urban governance and urban development. And we need to keep this in mind as we make this infrastructure more robust. So here are a few interventions that I think are extremely important when we think about mobility for platform workers. Number one is that as the nature of mobility evolves, wherein platform workers are substituting for use of personal vehicles, and they do a lot of to and fro ferrying of goods and people, these usage patterns have to be considered when you develop comprehensive mobility plans for a city. And you need to account for these movement of goods and places. Number two is that when we think about urban infrastructure, we also need to talk about mobility infrastructure. Rather, we need to talk about what kind of vehicles are being used. So very often these workers use inexpensive vehicles, which may also be older, and therefore the technology might be outdated. For us to make the transition more just, more sustainable, there is a need for having cleaner and electric vehicles to their disposal or made available to them, which means that vehicles which match their usage patterns are made available in the market on one hand. The workers are sensitized and made aware about the cost economics of these vehicles. And effective financing and leasing solutions are made available for these workers so that they can actually make use of these vehicles and reduce their carbon footprints on an overall basis. I want to then move on to the infrastructural element, which involves use of washrooms, public washrooms, and the security and mobility infrastructure at large. So over here, we know how workers on the move have various needs, including access to clean washrooms, clean water, resting points. And really, these are infrastructure that needs to be put in by the civic authorities themselves.
Right. So, Apoorv, your main point then is that it lies squarely on the governance by the state, and these measures that you have just listed needs to be put in place by the state.
By the governance, yes.
Governance,
at the same time, I think there is opportunity for industry to participate over here as well. And right. I realize you're running short of time, so I'll just make a small intervention, which is that just the way we have various elements that are available for CSR funding under the Companies Act, urban development could be one of them, wherein the urban infrastructure could be bolstered further. And I'll yield back the speech. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Apoorv. So taking a cue from what Apoorv said about the governance model and what needs to be done at the not at the aggregator or worker level, but beyond that. My next question is to Uma now. What do you think are then the key takeaways for India in terms of balancing both this creation of work opportunities as well as the rights of workers in this sector?
Okay, thank you so much, Bhavya, for this. And having listened to a number of other panelists, I think what I hear on one hand is, let's not over-regulate, we lose a lot of jobs. And then I have Sona on the other hand, almost showing my line saying, where are the new jobs? Can we really talk about where the new jobs are? And I think I'd like to echo that a bit and further the argument saying, do we all agree that the taxi drivers who were there in the traditional taxi driving are the ones who are today with Uber and Ola? Yes. Shona was talking about beauty parlor workers now opting to work on the platform. So tell me, by the end of the day, when you look at just these two sectors as examples, what do you see? You see a shift from the traditional way of doing the work. You still do it in the same way. It's just that you're adding another burden on you. That's a platform. Because earlier, you didn't have to pay that commission fee. Now you have to pay that because they say, oh, technology will help you get jobs. So for me, this is an opportune movement for India to use regulations to actually go about protecting workers in the informal economy, because what the platforms are doing is further precarizing the already informal workers. Can we use this as an opportunity to say, enough is enough? We don't need now tech companies coming and exploiting these workers. What we need to do, tech companies can be there, platforms can be there, but they have to ensure using technology to provide protection to workers. Just providing a little bit of accident insurance doesn't solve the problem. I think what you need is having proper pay for the work you do, having all kinds of benefits, paid leave and other labor protection benefits and social security benefits. So I think the Rajasthan bill is a good start, but a lot more needs to be achieved. And I think we need to ensure that these workers are treated well as we move in a technological realm. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Uma. I think that's a brilliant point that you made in both the rounds. If I could just summarize that point is that we need to leverage technology in seeing that how it unifies this whole very scattered, erstwhile very scattered informal sector, in terms that now there are tech companies involved, which in proper sense would be employers, or there would be organization in the organized sector. But now that they're calling them as workers or partners, cannot absolve them entirely of their burden that they otherwise would have in the organized sector. So then this can help us organize this informal sector instead of critiquing how this is, or building on this narrative that this is new kind of work, which is not. So now taking a cue from this, so Nikhil, what then you think are the most important recommendation to promote formal job creations in this evolving digital platform economy in your experience?
So I think one thing is very clear to workers that this is actually further precarize them, this mediation of the platform, the work. I won't even get into whether there's a job creation or not. That's less of an issue. This is a kind of commerce that exists because it benefits those who are doing that mediation. People are coming because they're looking for jobs. In the looking for jobs, they have some basic rights which must be met. I'll go to the first set of questions again. They are social security rights, they're basic wage and work rights, and they are rights that can only be based on greater formalization rather than more informalization, which this platform's economy so far enables. And it enables even for the formal work sector, it's informalizing even those at the high end. What the Rajasthan example has taught us, and I don't have much more expertise than that, is that it's come from people deeply distressed. They have demanded what is minimal possible because they're in a very unfair place in collective bargaining. They have managed to find a set of things that nobody can argue against. that they must have social security rights, number one. When we talk about minimum wages, it's not a question of whether this particular business will go out of business or not. There are long-standing legal frameworks that if you don't get the minimum, that industry has no business to be there. So that basic minimum we have to determine. We are unable to determine it in this particular. We don't know the working hours. We don't know anything about it. So the second thing that Rajasthan has done is that it has opened up, the law has opened up the data to at least the workers themselves, which was totally lost because of this platform. And through the workers themselves, to researchers, to unions, to others, so that the aggregated data at least can be used to see what exactly is going on in the sector and how it's going and how it's managed in different places. And the third is where I see that there is a great opportunity, actually. So far, the platforms have been used against the workers, and this requires a greater discussion, but there is no question that there is an unequal relationship because of the way data is used. Workers are at the mercy of whatever. You may have a benevolent aggregator, you may not, but you are at the mercy of whatever the aggregator does. For the first time, because the data is coming in and there is a transaction-based levy. So even the first question that Apoorv talked about, mobility, social security must be there across platforms. This particular law says that for every transaction, you will get your social security.
Nikhil.
Right, yeah, I won't go further. So I think that is a very important third point, that it offers an opportunity even for the informal worker, that tomorrow, if you get domestic workers onto a platform and give them these rights, maybe we can start giving them formal rights.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nikhil. So I'll just ask you to very quickly, crisply, very briefly, just make one closing remark each. Can we start with Sona?
As a closing remark, I think there is a lot to be done in terms of taking this opportunity of expanding platforms by the governments. What we are trying to do is we are trying to bring these aggregator companies together with the governments to actually work for the welfare. That's just the way that the Rajasthan government has done it. There are talks going on in many of the state governments to actually, legislate similar rules. And I don't think we are nowhere in regulation. So I'm echoing what Uma said, that over regulation is not the question. I think we should talk about regulation right now, and which is where we can actually address all the concerns of grievance redressal, earning mechanisms, protecting the workers' social security, and all of that. I'm going to stop here. But there is one gender concern that needs to be highlighted in the platform work, is there is always and there will always be this very different skilling differentials that actually continue from the occupations, the traditional occupations that women do. And if there is an opportunity to cut down on that, that bridge that gap or close that gap in skilling between men and women and between boys and girls, and try to diversify the occupational patterns, it is also, this is also the time to do that.
Right. Thank you, Sona. So that's a really good suggestion, because the new proposed codes, the 4 labor codes that consolidate existing legislations of 2020, which are yet to come into effect in India, do not take this into consideration well. So Professor Bornali, now what would be your recommendation for if such existing codes were revised before being enacted?
More than the enactment of the codes, I think one of the key things is we need to go back and ask ourselves, and this Uma's question, are they independent workers or are they employers or employees? I think that question needs to be asked. Right now, we're not even asking that. And I think even the Rajasthan law that way falters on that. But I think the 2 key messages that I would like to leave behind is that from what I learned in food delivery platform workers, is that they came from a variety of work. It's not that they came and they were leaving also. Exit was quite high. I'm sure that's not right. Sure, that's not true about other types of platform work. 2 key messages is that for food delivery platform work, I don't think so we should just look at social security, but we should look at upskilling and reskilling. We have to look at them together for food delivery platform workers in general also. And the second message is that while we design systems across 36 states and UTs, it takes forever. Why not at least get our existing why not get our platform workers into our existing social security schemes? At least they will have something. We could work on them to remove the barriers to access, like Ayushman Bharat, rations, health, and so on and so forth. I think it's very, given the average is 20,000 or 13,000, it is imperative that we get them onto something now rather than later. Let's stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bornali. Uma, what would be your closing remark on this?
I have a lot of things to say, but let me be very picky and say that I'd be very keen if the government could actually get the platforms to openly and transparently share the data about the number of people who actually use these platforms on a regular basis, amount of income they earn, and what their status is. If we could get that, that would be really
absolutely echo what you're saying, Uma, and coming from Nikhil's views also, that we have absolute, we don't know what we are operating with, because this has to be built into the regulations in terms of making data available.
Right. Apoorv, can we have your concluding remarks, please?
I'll make a few points and I'll be brief. Number one is platform work has unique characteristics which are very distinct from employment, and the Code on Social Security has an excellent job of recognizing that. It will allow us to make tailored solutions for the platform economy. Number two is, as laws at center and state come up, there needs to be harmonization. So effective worker protection, worker welfare is delivered, which is portable and continuous, at the same time balancing the cost of job creation and cost of innovation. Number three is, we cannot go after looking for a nail with the hammer that we have in hand. We need to use the right tool for the right job, and therefore there's need for innovation and market-driven solution for tailoring solutions, right from insurance, saving, pension, and so on, for platform work tailored to fit their savings, earnings, and spending patterns. And number four is, there is a role and responsibility for all parties over here, right from government, the aggregators, and platform workers themselves, to make sure that there is an effective, sustainable, and meaningful social protection infrastructure laid out for the benefit of the platform workers themselves.
Right. Thank you, Apoorv, for those crisp points. Very helpful. Lastly, but not the least, Nikhil, if you could please also recommend or just present your closing
I'll
remarks.
do it in the context of the Code on Social Security. The problem with the Code on Social Security is it lays down not just minimum, but also maximum. There's much, much more that needs to be done. The Rajasthan law is just one step. Much more needs to be done. And by the way, it is true, the employer-employee relationship was not what the campaign certainly asked for that. Finally, the draft that the government brought uses Code on Social Security language. But I'm saying that Rajasthan is one step. The Code on Social Security's problem is that it lays down a very narrow framework within which just Social Security will be done. Workers need regulation, they need access to data, they need grievance redress and their rights as workers, and only then can any industry survive. If we are talking about formalization, we need to look at this platform framework as something that has informalized, but now needs to be an opportunity for workers to formalize. And there, they will have to get access to data. They will have to have government on their side. And they will have a place where they can come together in a common place. That's what the Social Security Board attempts to do, but we can find other ways and means doing that. But we have to be able to look at government on the side of workers for their rights to be enabled.
Yeah. Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you, everyone, for those enlightening remarks. Farzana, would you want to take over the
Yeah,
question?
I just wanted to summarize this entire discussion. For me, I feel that I learned a lot. Absolutely. And I'm saying this really honestly. I feel that there's been a transformation in my thinking starting from, when we started the discussion to now, in terms of, the fact that you have this opportunity here to address the issue faced by the entire informal sector in India. In terms of bringing in regulation and formalizing work in this new emerging sector. I just want to thank Nikhil, Uma, Bornali, Sona, and Apoorv, who's left, for a very illuminating, very stimulating discussion that we've had over here. Thank you so much, Bhavya, also for your questions, and for, Bhavya has been leading the review of the legal frameworks that we have in India on the project. So I think all of this, I have learned a lot from it, and hopefully we can have this discussion again at some point, and we would have made some progress in India on this issue. Thank you so much.